G'day everyone, join us today as we take a look at the life and legacy of David Granger, the powerful and controversial Australian rules footballer known as Grave Danger. Feared by opponents, and adored by many Port Adelaide supporters, he was a player of rare talent and fierce loyalty. So let's dive in. David Philip Granger was born on January 23, 1955, in Victoria, Australia. He grew up in country Victoria and endured what has often been described as a difficult and troubled upbringing. Reports later stated that his childhood was marked by abuse and manipulation, experiences that would continue to affect him well into adulthood. Despite those hardships, Granger developed into an exceptionally gifted athlete, with a fierce competitive streak and enormous physical presence. As a young man, he played football in Western Victoria, including with the Darley Football Club. Even in his teenage years, his size, aggression, courage, and natural footballing ability stood out. Standing around 188 centimeters tall and weighing more than 90 kilograms in his prime, Granger possessed unusual athleticism for a key position player. He had strong hands, a long penetrating kick, and the fearless approach that became synonymous with his name throughout South Australian football. In 1974, former St Kilda coach Alan Killigrew, who was working as a talent scout for the Saints, noticed Granger while watching football in Western Victoria. Granger was invited to train and trial with St Kilda, and played reserve-grade games on permit. However, after disagreements within the club environment, including tensions involving coach Alan Jeans, he returned to country Victoria before establishing himself at VFL level. Around this period, former Melbourne full forward Fred Fanning, who knew Granger through his local area, reportedly encouraged him to pursue football more seriously, and recommended him to influential Port Adelaide secretary Bob McLean. That recommendation would change Granger's life forever. David arrived at Port Adelaide in 1975 during one of the most intense eras in SANFL history. Football in South Australia during the 1970s was brutally physical, tribal, and emotionally charged, especially between fierce rivals like Port Adelaide and Glenelg. Granger quickly became one of the most talked about footballers in the competition. From the moment he stepped onto the field at Alberton, supporters recognised they were watching someone different. He was powerful in the air, intimidating around the contest, and completely fearless. He predominantly played centre-half forward, one of the toughest positions on the ground at the time, where defenders constantly attempted to physically wear down key forwards with scragging, pushing, and off-the-ball contact. Former teammates and opponents alike often recalled Granger's vice-like hands in marking contests, and his beautiful long kick. He was capable of soaring pack marks and crashing through contests with enormous force. But beyond his footballing skill, he also developed a fearsome reputation for his aggression and willingness to physically protect teammates. It was during these years that the famous nickname Grave Danger became attached to him, a nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life. In 1975, Granger immediately became part of a rapidly improving Port Adelaide side under coach John Cale. By 1976, Port Adelaide looked almost unstoppable, winning every minor round game before suffering a shock grand final loss to Sturt, in what many considered an unlosable premiership. Even in those early years, Granger's reputation as both an elite footballer and intimidating enforcer was growing. He became central to Port Adelaide's brutal rivalry with Glenelg, a feud that would dominate SANFL football for years. In 1976, the final series sharpened that rivalry even further, with Granger involved in fiery clashes and Port Adelaide's intensity spilling into every contest. His willingness to retaliate physically became part of Port Adelaide folklore. Then came 1977, the year Granger became a premiership player. Port Adelaide reached the SANFL Centenary Grand Final against Glenelg in front of an enormous crowd at Football Park. Granger played a critical role at centre-half forward as Port Adelaide won the premiership by 8 points, breaking a long premiership drought and cementing one of the club's greatest modern teams. Teammates later described Granger as crucial to the side's structure. If he didn't mark the football himself, he brought the ball to ground for others, allowing Port's dangerous forward line to thrive. His partnership with full forward Tim Evans became one of the most effective combinations in SANFL football during that era. Although many outside Port Adelaide viewed Granger as controversial, inside the club he was admired as a loyal teammate and committed club man. Brian Cunningham later said Granger's football talent was often overshadowed by his notoriety, and that people outside the club misunderstood him. In 1979, Granger briefly returned to Victoria after renewed interest from St Kilda. His VFL debut was delayed by a badly broken hand, but he eventually played 3 senior games for the Saints during the 1979 season and kicked 1 goal. His first VFL appearance came wearing St Kilda's famous number 10 Guernsey. However, the Saints were struggling financially and on-field, and Granger soon returned to Port Adelaide for the 1980 SANFL season. By this stage, his reputation had become legendary across South Australia. Opposition supporters feared him. Port Adelaide supporters adored him. Few footballers of the era divided opinion more dramatically. In 1981, Granger again helped lead Port Adelaide to a SANFL premiership, once more against Glenelg. But the grand final also became one of the most controversial matches in South Australian football history. During the game, Granger struck Glenelg player Neville Twiggy Caldwell in an incident that effectively ended Caldwell's career. The fallout was enormous. Glenelg protested after the match, and Granger became the first SANFL footballer suspended using video evidence. Years later, Granger admitted he had been horrified by the incident and feared Caldwell had died. The controversy followed him for the remainder of his life and career. Despite this, teammates continued to defend his footballing ability and loyalty. The rivalry between Port Adelaide and Glenelg intensified further during the early 1980s. By 1982, tensions between the clubs had become explosive. The 1982 SANFL preliminary final between Port Adelaide and Glenelg remains one of the most infamous games in South Australian football history. Football Park was packed with more than 32,000 spectators as emotions boiled over in an atmosphere many described as chaotic and violent. Port Adelaide trailed heavily when coach John Cale introduced Granger into the game during the second quarter. Almost immediately, Granger struck Glenelg star Graham Cornes off the ball. The game descended into mayhem. Later in the match, Glenelg player Stephen Barrett suffered a broken leg in a collision involving Granger, while Peter Maynard also suffered injury. Port Adelaide eventually lost the game by a single point. As Granger left Football Park, he required a police escort due to the fury of Glenelg supporters. He received lengthy suspensions for the incidents, effectively ending his SANFL league career at just 27 years of age. By the end of 1982, David Granger's top-level football career was over. In total, he had played 103 games and kicked 92 goals for Port Adelaide, while also playing 3 VFL games for St Kilda. Although his career was relatively short, his impact on South Australian football was enormous. After leaving league football, Granger moved to Port Pirie, where he played for Solomontown in the Spencer Gulf Football League. His arrival reportedly drew record crowds, demonstrating how famous he had become across South Australia. But life after football proved difficult. Granger later spoke openly about feeling isolated and abandoned after his football career ended. He struggled emotionally and battled depression for many years. In a television interview years later, he reflected on the emotional toll of his exile from Port Adelaide after retirement, and revealed he had once broke into the Port Adelaide locker room at Alberton Oval, and attempted to take his own life near his old locker. He also claimed that during his playing days, football culture encouraged players to physically target opponents in the pursuit of victory. Granger described himself as a good soldier who had done what he was instructed to do within the brutal football environment of that era. Away from football, Granger developed a passion for gardening and was reportedly proud of maintaining an immaculate couch grass lawn at his Woodville home. Friends and supporters who knew him personally often described him as approachable, easy to talk to, and far gentler away from the football field than his public image suggested. However, his later years were also marked by legal and personal troubles. In the early 2000s, Granger faced financial difficulties and openly discussed struggles involving debt and mental health. In 2003, he was sentenced to prison after cannabis was found at his home. Reports noted he had previously battled cannabis-related offences during the 1990s and early 2000s. Many who knew Granger believed much of his substance use stemmed from chronic physical pain from football injuries, combined with long-running emotional struggles. In 2015, he again made headlines after being convicted of assault involving South Australian MP Michael Atkinson, following an unusual incident where water was thrown over him while riding a bicycle in Woodville Park. Granger represented himself in court and attracted media attention because of his eccentric behaviour during proceedings. Despite these conflicts, many within football circles continued to defend him as a deeply misunderstood figure whose football ability and loyalty were often overshadowed by the incidents attached to his name. They remembered a talented key position player with tremendous courage, elite marking ability, strong skills, and fierce dedication to teammates. Tim Ginniver later described him as an amazing footballer, praising his hands, his unselfishness, and his ability to play above his height. Off the field, those who knew him personally often spoke warmly of his kindness and willingness to spend time with ordinary supporters. In his later years, Granger battled significant health problems, including cancer. Port Adelaide Football Club confirmed he had struggled with health issues for several years before his death. David Granger passed away on March 7, 2024, at the age of 69 following his battle with cancer. Port Adelaide publicly extended condolences to his daughter Carly and his family. His death prompted tributes from former teammates, football journalists, supporters, and clubs across Australia. Even those who had criticised aspects of his career acknowledged that David Granger remained one of the most memorable and complex figures South Australian football had ever produced. For many Port Adelaide supporters, he symbolised an era when football was fierce, emotional, and uncompromising. His image wearing the number 18 Guernsey became permanently woven into the club's identity, and his name forever on the number 18 locker at Alberton. David Granger's life was complicated. There were triumphs, mistakes, pain, and struggles. But there was also extraordinary football talent, loyalty to teammates, and a deep impact on generations of supporters who never forgot him. Loved by some, feared by others, and misunderstood by many, David Granger left behind one of the most unforgettable legacies in South Australian and Australian football history. Thank you for watching, take care and bye for now.